August 15, 2015. As Guy Garman plunges into the dark abyss, the weight of over 400 pounds of diving equipment presses against his body, adding to the crushing pressure of the ocean around him. As the 56-year-old's family waits on a boat up above, their gaze is locked on the faint trail of bubbles rising to the surface. Garman knows he's about to make history, or become it. He's attempting a feat that would put him in the pantheon of divers, going 1,200 feet under the water. But after reaching the bottom, he prepares to ascend, but a creeping sense of dread begins to take hold. Something is wrong. His equipment feels heavier now. The icy water gnaws at his body. The crushing pressure seems to wrap tighter around him with every passing second. His breathing grows shallow and irregular as he draws from the carefully balanced gas mixture in his mouthpiece. Then, a haze begins to cloud his thoughts. Lightheadedness sets in. Is it exhaustion or something far worse? Could nitrogen narcosis be setting in? He knows he can't afford to think like that. He needs to keep on going. The Scuba Tech deep diver support team is waiting for him at 360 feet. His son is waiting for him. If he can reach them, maybe everything will be okay. Just maybe. Born to globe-trotting missionaries Addie and Larry, Guy Garman grew up in the Amazon jungle with the Agraruna natives. Splitting his youth between Ecuador and Peru, he returned to the U.S. to get his Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine qualifications. Guy built a respected career as an ear, nose, and throat doctor in East Tennessee before making the turquoise water of St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands his home. Diving wasn't always a part of Guy's life. It was a hobby he discovered later, after moving to St. Croix. But what began as a pastime quickly turned into a passion. Joining the Scuba Tech team at the St. Croix Ultimate Blue Water Adventures Diving School, Guy earned the nickname Doc Deep, a testament to both his medical profession and his fearless spirit beneath the waves. Ambitious and relentless, Garman wasn't content to remain a hobbyist technical diver. He set his sights on making history. Driven by a desire to inspire his fellow divers and make his family proud, he resolved to attempt the unthinkable, breaking the diving world record by descending 1,200 feet into the ocean's depths. Needless to say, this is easier said than done. The technical diving depth world record is a poisoned chalice, a pursuit that has claimed the lives of many accomplished divers. Even the most experienced are not immune to its dangers. Just 2 weeks before Garman's attempt, the diving community was shaken by the loss of Russian diving legend Natalia Molchanova. At 53 years old, Natalia was no ordinary diver, a multi-world record holder and arguably the greatest free diver of all time. She was capable of holding her breath for an astonishing 9 minutes. Free diving is an even more dangerous and challenging sport than technical diving. It involves going deep as you can with a single breath rather than with oxygen tanks. In this case, Natalia's dive wasn't even an ambitious one for her, a mere 35 meters down, but she never resurfaced. Nobody knows exactly how Natalia Molchanova died. The leading theory is that she had been swept away by a strong underwater current off the coast of Ibiza and subsequently drowned. The cruel irony of it all was that this wasn't even a record-breaking attempt. She and some friends had just been diving for fun. She was a free-diving superstar, and we all thought nothing could harm her, said Kimmo Lahtinen, the president of the Global Federation for Freediving. Nothing could happen to her, but, we are playing with the ocean, and when you play with the ocean, you know who is the strongest one. If the ocean's cruel power could claim even a world-class diver like Natalia Molchanova, then Guy Garman faced a battle as he prepared for his fateful descent. Undeterred, he embarked on a rigorous 2-year training regimen with the Scuba Tech crew. The Scuba Tech team clearly had a lot of confidence in Guy and his abilities, believing that he knew more about technical deep diving than anyone else on the planet. The only exception to this might be the diver who broke the record before him. Ahmed Gaber, a 17-year dive instructor and former Egyptian Special Forces officer. In 2014, he was able to make a 1,090-foot descent into the depths of the Red Sea in a staggering 12 minutes. However, in order to avoid the ill effects of decompression, his rise back to the top was a grueling 14-hour process, and Guy Doc Deep Garman was hoping to dive over 100 feet deeper. As the fateful day approached, Guy and his team were feeling in high spirits. Practice had been successful, and in his 600 previous dives, he'd successfully reached depths of over 800 feet. He might have been ready at last to join the diving history books. He was diving at Long Reach, a deep reef near Christiansted Harbor. He'd installed a 1,300-foot diving line weighted to the ocean floor with a 250-pound anchor. Over the 2 years of preparation, according to his trainers and support team, He'd made meticulous plans for every possible situation, from what they should do if he had a seizure underwater to what should be done if his oxygen supply failed. Guy Garman's approach to the mission was far from casual. It was meticulous, methodical, and deeply rooted in science. His 400 pounds of gear consisted of 3 huge oxygen tanks, known as monster tanks in the diving community, 4 double tanks, the tanks you'd see on a typical scuba diver, 3 different computers, and a GoPro to document the dive firsthand. He was also equipped with a line marker that would let him update his depth on the diving line, ensuring that he could verify his record with Guinness. The support team had meticulously prepared for every eventuality, even staging 28 additional tanks to resupply Garman at crucial points during the dive. They had gone over the plan repeatedly until it was second nature. He would meet with the support staff, including Kip, his 20-year-old son, at each stage of the descent to use their oxygen until he reached the record-breaking depth solo. But the descent would, in theory, be much simpler than the ascent. After the dive down, he would ascend back to 350 feet to meet the support group, including Kip yet again. At that point, he would remain at this depth to decompress for 10 hours before making the rest of the ascent. Everyone involved knew that this part of the record would be the most difficult and potentially dangerous. Proper decompression is vital for a diver's survival in a deep technical dive like the one Guy Garman would be attempting. The air that divers breathe isn't just air, it's a carefully calculated lifeline. For deep dives, breathing pure oxygen is not an option. It would be extremely dangerous, potentially causing oxygen toxicity at high pressures. Instead, technical divers rely on a precisely balanced gas mixture known as trimix, a blend of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen. Each component serves a critical purpose. And Guy isn't planning on a recreational dive here, where the limit is 40 meters. He is going to 1,197 feet, potentially requiring a different trimix for each level of the dive. The deeper a dive goes, the more inert nitrogen dilutes the body, entering the bloodstream and even the body's tissue. As a diver ascends, the water pressure decreases. Nitrogen dissolved in their body begins to escape, forming microscopic bubbles. If the ascent happens too quickly, these tiny bubbles can rapidly expand in the blood vessels and the tissues, causing excruciating pain and potentially catastrophic damage. It's a condition known as decompression sickness, or more commonly, the bends. Decompression sickness is separated into type 1 and type 2, one of which is far more serious than the other. Type 1 is the milder form, primarily affecting the joints, skin, and the lymphatic system. While it is excruciatingly painful and deeply unpleasant, it is not typically life-threatening. Type 2, however, is far more dangerous and often life-altering. Unlike type 1, it impacts vital organ systems, including the brain, heart, and the lungs. For those afflicted, recovery may be incomplete or impossible. And because Guy Garman is in his mid-50s, he is at a greater risk of experiencing decompression sickness than a younger diver. But this doesn't concern him all that much. He's armed with his plan, his gear, and his support team. In theory, he had everything going for him. At 6 a.m. on the day of the dive, he was feeling confident and ready to descend. He entered the warm waters of Long Reach and started diving. Over the course of 38 minutes, he descended into the darkness, reaching the record-breaking depth he had spent years preparing for. This was the easy part. According to the plan, he was now meant to begin the next critical phase, ascending carefully to 350 feet, where his team, including his son Kip, waited to assist with the decompression process. But as Garman turned to make his ascent, something went wrong. Terribly wrong. It was a dive fraught with peril, each moment balanced on a knife's edge. Countless variables loomed, any one of which could trigger a number of problems. The first and potentially most devastating risk factor is experiences, or rather inadequate experience. Garman had prepared for this dive over a 2-year period, had reached depths of over 800 feet, and done hundreds of previous dives. It might seem impressive, but it actually doesn't even scratch the surface of what might be required to break the record Guy was attempting to break. As experienced technical diver Andy Davis commented, Guy had been diving for only 4 years when he decided to attempt the world record. This averaged out to only 3 dives per week over that time. Only 200 of Guy's dives went below 200 feet, and only 35 of his dives went below 490 feet. This is still less than half of the depth that Guy was hoping to descend to on his record-breaking dive. Guy's climb from hobbyist to advanced technical diver was shockingly fast, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Davis has 10 times the number of dives logged, and over 25 years compared to Guy's scant 4 years of experience. But in spite of all this, Davis has said he still wouldn't be comfortable attempting what Guy Garman was about to attempt. Davis doesn't even consider himself as nearly one of the most experienced technical divers out there. There are far more experienced divers than him, all of which have not attempted the record. There were also questions raised about Guy's max depth of just over 800 feet. While that is undeniably impressive to people who are inexperienced divers, Davis noted that the difference between 800 feet and Guy's record goal of 1,200 feet is a whole universe of difference that presents unique and dangerous health risks. Health risks that Guy wouldn't have experienced on his shallower dives. It seemed Guy hadn't even considered his tolerance for extreme deep-water hyperbaric physiological reactions, such as high-pressure neurological syndrome or HPNS, first reported as helium tremors, though also possibly using nitrogen-based trimix. This condition has resulted in a huge number of unfortunate deaths for deep-sea divers. The symptoms include tremors, seizures, and the desire to sleep, visual disturbances, nausea, dizziness, and decreased mental performance. There is also the risk of compression arthralgia, a form of type 1 decompression sickness. This causes severe pain in the muscles and joints as the diver goes deeper as a result of the hyperbaric pressure compressing the cartilage on the joints. In addition to the pain, the divers have claimed that they've felt their joints popping and feeling like sandpaper when they move. This is debilitating at the best of times, but for an older diver like Guy, entering such a debilitated state could mean the difference between life and death. Davis was also deeply concerned by the speed at which Garman progressed through his diving journey, as shown through his Facebook posts. Each dive represented a vast leap from the previous one, rather than the slow incremental dives that Davis believes should have been Guy's process. Each quick leap bolstered Guy's confidence and resolve that the next dive would be just as effortless. This leads to the next major risk factor Guy would potentially experience: overconfidence. Scuba Tech referred to Guy as someone who knows more about technical diving than anyone else on the planet. When it comes to technical diving, he is still at the shallow end of the metaphorical pool. Acting as though he was a far more experienced diver than he actually was could open some incredibly dangerous doors. In the PADI TechRec Tech Deep Diver Manual, the first of the 4 attitudes that characterize leading technical divers is humility. Part of this humility is acknowledging your own limitations, and another is listening to the advice of your diving peers. When Guy and his team released a well-produced video hyping up the impending attempt on the world record, it ignited a deep sense of panic on tech diving forums. One user said, "My immediate reaction while watching it was, 'He's a dead man.' What I was able to research on this guy and his team left me with the impression of a marked lack of professional experience and awareness of how to do this type of dive. And perhaps most devastatingly of all, wrong gear, overloaded divers who really can't swim with the equipment package, concentration only on up and down, no real support divers at depth, and no contingency for deep problems." Andy Davis's analysis of the situation offered a more measured perspective, suggesting that the issue may not lie solely with Guy Garman as an individual. Instead, Davis pointed to a deeper concern within the St. Croix technical diving culture, a community that in his view glorified sheer depth as the ultimate achievement. Davis further argued that the unrealistic expectations and constant reinforcement from the Scuba Tech diving team may have created a feedback loop of toxic hype. This environment, he suggested, might have amplified Doc's deep confidence in his abilities, potentially beyond what was realistically safe. With his local reputation as Doc Deep to protect, he might have faced intense social pressure to succeed, regardless of any doubts he might have. And that exact mentality is extremely dangerous for divers. However, even all of these risk factors, the lack of knowledge, the lack of experience, the overconfidence, the feedback loop within the group, hardly compares to the dangers presented by this risk factor: the flaws in Guy Garman's equipment and methodology, as pointed out by the same expert divers who'd been thrown into panic mode by the news of his world record plans. Many criticized the overweighting of Doc Deep's equipment. They claimed that the process for gas switching mid-dive was needlessly complicated and the entire setup was ergonomically bulky. The setup would weigh down the diver and make it extremely difficult to swim, which when you are hundreds of meters underwater is a huge problem. But the problem didn't just lay with the oxygen tanks. The support team itself and their proficiency to help Guy if something went wrong was seriously drawn into question. One diver expressed bafflement at the support team's positioning at 350 to 360 feet. They questioned how a team stationed at that depth could realistically provide meaningful assistance to Guy during the nearly 900 feet of diving below, where the risks were far greater and the likelihood of challenges escalating was much higher. It left Guy isolated during the most perilous part of his descent and ascent, raising concerns about the effectiveness of the plan in mitigating the extreme dangers of the dive. And when Guy reaches the bottom of the dive, he wouldn't at all be within the visual range of the support team, rendering it basically impossible for them to assist him quickly. Even basic tenets of technical diving, like choosing to bring a rebreather, were neglected. Instead, they opted to use an open-circuit breathing system, putting Guy at substantial risk of narcosis and oxygen toxicity. Would Doc Deep's grand ambition and the hard work of his team be enough to overcome all of this and help him break a grand record in technical diving history? Sadly, it would not. Guy Garman's son and the rest of the Scuba Tech team became concerned when he didn't ascend to the checkpoint. They waited and waited and waited. But Doc Deep was sadly fated to never leave the depths of Long Reach, having become unmoored from his diving line. Garman's body was recovered in the following days, with the cause of death listed as drowning. It's just one more painful reminder that when you play with the ocean, you know who is the strongest. Now check out Get Out, the most brutal silent death in history, or watch this instead.